Evelyn Moore stood in front of the mirror of their Manhattan apartment, staring at a woman no one in the Wright family truly saw. She slowly removed the diamond bracelet from her wrist and placed it back into the velvet box, next to a watch worth more than the annual salary of most people attending tonight's party. She chose instead a simple dress, no logo, no sparkle, no clues. If love was real, she told herself, it wouldn't need proof. If respect existed, it wouldn't depend on money. Behind her, Daniel Wright adjusted his tie, glancing at his iPhone as if something important might suddenly save him from the evening ahead. His jaw tightened when he noticed Evelyn's bare wrists. "You don't want to wear anything nicer?" he asked casually, too casually. Evelyn smiled. "I'm comfortable like this." That smile hid a decision she had made days ago. Tonight wasn't just another family gathering at the Plaza Hotel. Tonight was a test. One she wasn't sure her marriage would survive. The Wrights were celebrating Leonard Wright's birthday in one of the most prestigious ballrooms on Fifth Avenue. Old money, quiet power, and sharp eyes trained to measure worth in seconds. Evelyn had attended many charity galas in her life, but tonight she was going in stripped of every visible sign of who she really was. No one there knew she was the primary beneficiary of Moore Holdings. No one knew the foundation sponsoring half the city's cultural programs answered to her signature. And most importantly, no one in Daniel's family knew that one conversation, one cruel word, could decide whether she would bring a child into this family or walk away forever. As the car pulled up to the plaza, Evelyn felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Not fear, recognition. She had felt this before, years ago, when people looked through her instead of at her. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected laughter and champagne glasses. Patricia Wright spotted them immediately. Her smile froze for half a second when she took in Evelyn's appearance, then returned sharper, thinner. "Oh," Patricia said softly, her eyes scanning Evelyn from head to toe. "That's what you're wearing?" The words were gentle. The message was not. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but Daniel squeezed her hand, not in support but in warning. And in that moment, standing under a ceiling worth millions, Evelyn realized something chilling. This wasn't a test of her in-laws. This was a test of her husband. The ballroom at the plaza shimmered with polished elegance, but beneath the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, Evelyn felt the temperature drop. Patricia Wright stepped closer, her heels silent against the marble floor, her smile flawless in the way only practiced women mastered. She kissed Daniel lightly on the cheek, then turned her full attention to Evelyn again, as if inspecting an item she hadn't ordered. "You look comfortable," Patricia said, lingering on the word. "Thank you," Evelyn replied evenly. That was the goal. Patricia's lips curved, not upward, but inward. "How refreshing. Most women these days try so hard." Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, Evelyn's been busy with work." "Oh, I'm sure," Patricia said, already losing interest. She linked her arm through Daniel's and guided him away without looking back. "Leonard wants to introduce you to some people from the firm." Evelyn stood alone for a moment, the hum of conversation washing around her like distant waves. Laughter erupted near the bar. A group of well-dressed women glanced her way, then quickly away, their eyes flicking with the unmistakable curiosity of judgment. Chloe Wright approached next, champagne flute in hand, her smile wide and careless. "Wow," she said, circling Evelyn slowly. "You really went minimalist tonight." Evelyn met her gaze. "I like simple." Chloe laughed. "Of course you do. I guess when you don't grow up around this kind of thing, it all feels a bit extra." Evelyn felt the words land, soft but sharp. She chose not to respond. "Don't take it personally," Chloe added, lowering her voice. "Our family's just very particular." Across the room, Leonard Wright was holding court. He spoke loudly, confidently, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention. Daniel stood beside him, nodding at the right moments, his posture subtly changing straighter, smaller, like a boy eager for approval. Leonard raised his glass. "Family is everything," he announced. "And a strong family knows how to protect its future." Several guests murmured in agreement. Leonard's eyes flicked briefly to Evelyn, then away, as if she were a footnote. Dinner was announced moments later. Place cards guided guests to their seats, and Evelyn followed hers to a table tucked slightly farther from the center. Not hidden, but not honored either. Close enough to be seen, far enough to be dismissed. As she sat, a woman across from her leaned in politely. "So, Evelyn, what do you do exactly?" "I work in education," Evelyn said. "Oh," the woman replied, nodding too quickly. "That's lovely. Is it volunteer work, or—" Evelyn smiled faintly. "It's my career. Thanks for watching." Before the woman could respond, Patricia appeared behind Evelyn's chair. "Sweetheart," she said, resting a hand lightly on Evelyn's shoulder, "would you mind switching seats with Mrs. Caldwell? She has trouble hearing, and this spot is closer to the speakers." Evelyn looked up. Mrs. Caldwell was perfectly capable, seated at the prime table near Leonard. Daniel looked over, hesitation flickering across his face. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might say something. He didn't. "Of course," Evelyn said quietly, standing. As she moved to the new seat near the edge of the room, she felt something settle deep in her chest. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't social awkwardness. This was deliberate. And as the first course was served, Evelyn realized the evening was no longer about endurance. It was about survival and memory. Because she would remember every word, every smile, every silence. By the time the main course arrived, Evelyn no longer felt like a guest. She felt like an experiment. Waiters moved in, practiced synchrony, placing plates of seared sea bass and roasted vegetables before the tables closer to the stage. At Evelyn's table, service came later, almost as an afterthought. She noticed the difference, the subtle hierarchy enforced without a single spoken word. Across the room, Daniel laughed at something his father said. It wasn't a real laugh. Evelyn knew his real laugh. This one was sharper, eager, the sound he made when he wanted to be accepted. He leaned in as Leonard spoke, nodding, absorbing every sentence like a student desperate to impress. Patricia floated between tables, greeting guests, her posture regal. Each time she passed Evelyn, her eyes slid over her, never landing. It was as if Evelyn had become part of the decor. "So," Leonard said loudly, directing the conversation at his table, "Daniel tells me work's been stable." Daniel straightened. "Yes, sir. We're in talks for a major expansion." Leonard smiled thinly. "Good. A man needs momentum, especially when he's married." A few people chuckled politely. Leonard continued, his tone conversational but pointed. "Of course, having the right support system makes all the difference. A partner who understands ambition, who adds value. If you tacked on." The word hung in the air. Evelyn looked up instinctively, her eyes finding Daniel's across the room. For a brief second, their gazes locked. She waited. She didn't expect a speech, just a look. A nod. Anything. Daniel looked away. Chloe, seated beside Leonard, smirked and took a sip of champagne. "Some people are born knowing how this world works," she added lightly. "Others have to learn." More laughter. Louder this time. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her fork. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but her face remained calm. She had spent years mastering that stillness. It was the armor she wore when she refused to give others the satisfaction of seeing her break. The woman beside her leaned over again. "They're very proud of Daniel," she whispered. "It must be intimidating, being new to this family." Evelyn nodded politely. "It is." The woman smiled sympathetically, mistaking restraint for weakness. At the center table, Patricia raised her glass. "I just want to say how grateful we are for family," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "For tradition, for continuity, and for knowing where we belong." Her gaze flicked, finally, directly at Evelyn. The message was unmistakable. Evelyn felt the weight of it settle in her chest, not as pain, but as something heavier, final. She thought of the prenup she had signed years ago, trusting Daniel when he said his parents were just cautious. She thought of the quiet sacrifices she'd made, the invitations she'd declined, the conversations she'd softened so he wouldn't feel caught between worlds. And she thought of how easily he was letting her stand alone now. The server placed dessert on her table, a simple plate of fruit, while laughter erupted as chocolate soufflés were served near the stage. It was a small thing. Almost laughable. Almost. Daniel finally glanced over again, his expression uncertain. Their eyes met, and this time Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't plead, she didn't smile. She simply held his gaze. Something flickered across his face. Discomfort, guilt, fear. But still, he did nothing. That was the moment Evelyn understood. Not all betrayals are loud. Some arrive dressed in silence, wrapped in politeness, delivered over white tablecloths and crystal glasses. And those are the ones that change everything. Because as the applause rose for Leonard's final toast, Evelyn made a quiet promise to herself. She would never again beg for a place at a table that required her disappearance. The evening did not end with dessert. For Evelyn, it only sharpened. As guests rose from their seats and drifted toward the lounge area, the room shifted into a louder, looser rhythm. Jazz music floated through the air. Laughter grew bolder. This was the part of the night where pretenses dropped just enough for truth to slip through. Evelyn stood to find Daniel, hoping foolishly that away from his parents he might finally speak. She spotted him near the bar, surrounded by Leonard's associates. Chloe was there too, leaning against the marble counter, her posture relaxed, her confidence unearned. And beside Daniel stood a woman Evelyn had never seen before. She was tall, polished, effortlessly elegant in a navy dress that looked tailored rather than bought. Her hair was pulled back cleanly, her smile measured. She laughed softly at something Daniel said, placing a hand on his arm as if it belonged there. Evelyn slowed her steps. Chloe noticed her first. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "Evelyn," she called out, just loud enough to draw attention. "Come meet someone." Daniel turned. For a split second, his face went pale. "This is Madeline Cross," Chloe said brightly. "She works in strategy." "Brilliant woman." Madeline extended her hand. "It's nice to finally meet you." The words "finally meet" landed oddly. Evelyn shook her hand. Madeline's grip was firm, confident, assessing. "Daniel's told us so much about your work," Madeline continued. "Education, right? That's admirable." There it was again. Admirable. A compliment that required no respect. "Yes," Evelyn replied calmly. "It is? Do those." Leonard joined them, glass in hand. "Madeline here has been advising some impressive portfolios," he said, sharp mind, exactly the kind of person who understands growth. His gaze shifted to Evelyn. "You can learn a lot from people like her." Daniel laughed awkwardly. "Dad." "It's not criticism," Leonard interrupted. "It's perspective." Patricia appeared moments later, her eyes flicking between the two women. The contrast pleased her. "Madeline's family is from Boston," Patricia said conversationally. "Old institutions, strong values." Madeline smiled politely. "I was raised to think contribution matters." Patricia nodded approvingly. Evelyn felt something inside her tighten. This wasn't coincidence. This was choreography. "Excuse me," Evelyn said quietly. She turned to leave, but Chloe's voice followed her like a blade. "You know," Chloe said to the group, "it must be hard for Evelyn, being around women who naturally fit in." The laughter that followed was quick and cruel. Evelyn stopped. Slowly, she turned back. Daniel opened his mouth. She saw it, the hesitation, the calculation. He said nothing. That silence hit harder than Chloe's words. Evelyn nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact she could no longer deny. Then she walked away, her steps steady, her spine straight. In the hallway outside the ballroom, the noise dulled. The gold-framed mirrors reflected a woman who looked composed, untouched. But when Evelyn reached the restroom and locked herself into a stall, her breath finally broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth, forcing herself not to cry. Not here, not tonight. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about Madeline. It was about being replaced while still present. About being diminished in motion. About realizing that the people who were supposed to protect you were actively making room for someone else. When Evelyn emerged, she washed her hands slowly, deliberately, watching herself in the mirror. "This is real," she whispered. And with that realization came something unexpected. Not despair, resolve. Because if they were already treating her like she didn't belong, then she had nothing left to lose. And everything left to reclaim. Evelyn did not leave the party immediately. She could have. No one would have stopped her. In fact, no one would have noticed. That realization settled over her like a second humiliation. She stood near one of the tall windows overlooking Fifth Avenue, the Manhattan skyline glowing below, and watched the room as if she were no longer inside it. Conversations overlapped, glasses clinked, power circulated in quiet currents, passing from one confident hand to another. Daniel still hadn't come after her. Instead, she saw him again near the bar, Madeline beside him, Her posture relaxed, her laugh perfectly timed. Leonard leaned in, clearly impressed. Patricia observed from a distance, satisfaction softening her features for the first time that night. Evelyn understood then that the evening had crossed an invisible line. This was no longer subtle cruelty. It was rehearsal. A rehearsal for a future where she did not exist. She moved toward the edge of the room, intending to find her coat, when a server gently stopped her. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quietly. "This area is reserved for family and close associates." Evelyn blinked. "I am family." The server hesitated, glancing toward Patricia, who stood only a few feet away. Patricia met Evelyn's eyes and gave the slightest shake of her head. The server lowered his gaze. "Of course, my mistake." He stepped aside, but the damage was done. Patricia approached, her expression smooth, almost kind. "Sweetheart," she said, lowering her voice, "you shouldn't wander. People might get confused." "Confused about what?" Evelyn asked. Patricia smiled. "About where you fit." The words were gentle, the message was not. "I'm just stepping out," Evelyn replied. "Daniel will be busy for a while," Patricia said. "Important conversations, you understand." Evelyn looked past her, searching for her husband one last time. Daniel was laughing again, his body angled away from her, fully absorbed. Madeline said something, and Leonard nodded approvingly. Evelyn felt the final thread loosen. She excused herself without another word and walked toward the exit, her heels steady against the marble floor. No one stopped her. No one followed. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp, grounding. Taxis passed in a blur of light. The city continued, indifferent and alive. Evelyn stood on the steps of the plaza, breathing in slowly, deliberately, as if relearning how. Her phone buzzed in her purse. A message from Daniel. "Where did you go? Mom's looking for you." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have said something." Just logistics. Evelyn stared at the screen, then locked her phone without replying. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if staying was the real betrayal? She thought of the prenup, the sacrifices, the careful way she had folded herself smaller to make others comfortable. She thought of the way Patricia had looked at Madeline, as if already imagining her in family photos. This wasn't about money or class. It was about erasure. Evelyn hailed a cab. As she slid into the back seat, the driver asked where she was headed. She hesitated, then said, "Home." But even as she gave the address, she knew something had shifted. The woman who had entered the plaza hoping for reassurance was not the woman leaving its steps. This night had taken something from her, and in its place, it had given her clarity. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that demands action. The invitation arrived 2 days later, printed on thick ivory paper, with Leonard Wright's name embossed in gold. "A family weekend in the Hamptons," it read, "a chance to reconnect." Evelyn held the card between her fingers, already sensing the weight behind the words. This wasn't reconciliation, it was escalation. Daniel stood behind her in the kitchen, scrolling through emails on his MacBook, his tone carefully neutral. "They're trying to smooth things over," he said. "You know how my parents are. Formal, old school." Evelyn looked at him. Really looked. "Are they inviting me?" she asked quietly. "Or are they inviting the idea of a wife they can control?" Daniel frowned. "You're overthinking." That was his favorite defense. It always had been. Against her better judgment, Evelyn agreed to go. Not because she believed it would be better, but because she needed to see it clearly. Doubt only survives in the absence of evidence. The Hamptons' house was vast and immaculate, white stone against blue sky, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond manicured lawns. It looked like a magazine spread. It felt like a stage. From the moment they arrived, Evelyn was assigned a role she hadn't auditioned for. Patricia handed her a list before she could even put her bag down. "Would you mind helping the staff organize dinner?" she said pleasantly. "You're so good with details." Chloe smirked from the couch. Madeline sat beside her, legs crossed, sunglasses still on indoors, as if she owned the place. Daniel hesitated. Evelyn waited. He said nothing, so she nodded and took the list. Throughout the afternoon, Evelyn moved between kitchen and patio, setting tables, carrying trays, refilling glasses. Guests arrived, friends of the Wrights, donors, people who mattered. Madeline drifted among them effortlessly, introduced as a close friend of the family. Evelyn was introduced as nothing at all. At one point, Leonard clapped his hands together. "Everyone, Madeline has graciously offered to help Daniel with an upcoming strategy presentation," he announced. "A fresh perspective is always valuable." Applause followed. Evelyn stood by the counter, a folded napkin in her hands, feeling something inside her go quiet. Dinner was served outside as the sun dipped low. Evelyn was seated at the far end, near the staff. The ocean breeze carried laughter toward her, but none of it reached. Patricia leaned over mid-meal. "You don't mind sitting there, do you?" she asked softly. "It's just easier for serving." Evelyn met her eyes. "No," she said, "I don't mind." What she meant was, "I see you." Later that night, as guests lingered over wine, Chloe raised her voice just enough to carry. "Some women marry into families," she said lightly, "and some women adapt to them." Madeline smiled. "Adaptability is underrated." Daniel laughed. Not loudly, not proudly, but enough. That sound cut deeper than any insult. Evelyn excused herself and walked toward the beach. The sand was cool beneath her feet. Waves rolled in steady, relentless rhythms. She thought of the life she had built quietly, carefully, the power she had hidden, the patience she had mistaken for loyalty. Behind her, the house glowed with light, full of people who believed she belonged nowhere. Evelyn stared out at the dark water and understood the truth at last. This family wasn't testing her. They were erasing her. And the most dangerous part was that they believed she would let them. The shift came quietly, the way real danger often does. It happened the morning after the Hamptons' dinner, when the house felt too clean, too calm, as if the night before had been erased on purpose. Evelyn sat alone at the long kitchen island, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in front of her. Through the glass walls, the ocean looked distant and indifferent. Patricia entered without greeting, carrying a thin leather folder. "Leonard and I thought it would be best to have a practical conversation," she said, setting the folder down as if it weighed nothing. Evelyn looked at it, then at Patricia. "About what?" "About security," Patricia replied smoothly. "About protecting Daniel's future. About avoiding misunderstandings." Daniel appeared in the doorway moments later, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. He froze when he saw the folder. "Mom," he said, a warning in his voice. Patricia didn't look at him. "Sit," she said. Daniel obeyed. Patricia opened the folder and slid several pages toward Evelyn. The top page was familiar enough to make her stomach tighten. A postnuptial agreement. "I thought we already had one," Evelyn said carefully. "This is an update," Leonard said from behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. His presence filled the room instantly. "Circumstances change." Evelyn scanned the pages. The language was dense, clinical, but the meaning was clear. If the marriage ended, she would walk away with almost nothing. No claim to future assets, no spousal support, no discretion. Her voice was steady. "Why now?" Leonard leaned against the counter. "Because we've realized you may not fully understand what it means to be part of this family." Patricia folded her hands. "This is for everyone's peace of mind." Evelyn looked at Daniel. "Did you know about this?" He hesitated. "Too long." "They're just trying to help," he said finally. "It doesn't mean anything if we're happy." "That's not how contracts work," Evelyn replied. Patricia's smile thinned. "If you don't intend to leave, then you have nothing to worry about." There it was, the trap dressed as logic. Evelyn closed the folder gently. "I'll have my lawyer review this." The air changed instantly. Leonard's expression hardened. "That won't be necessary." Patricia tilted her head. "Why involve outsiders? We're family." Evelyn stood. "Family doesn't pressure you into signing documents without representation." Daniel stood too, panic flickering across his face. "Evelyn, please," he said quietly, "can we not do this here?" She turned to him, her voice low but firm. "This is exactly where it's being done." Leonard straightened. "Let's be clear," he said. "Refusing to sign sends a message." "What message?" Evelyn asked. "That you don't trust us," Patricia answered. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I don't." Silence fell, thick and heavy. Daniel looked between them, caught, unraveling. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said to Evelyn, desperation creeping into his voice. "If you just sign, this goes away." Evelyn stared at him, really stared, and felt something inside her finally break free. "This doesn't go away," she said. It becomes permanent, Leonard scoffed. You're being emotional. No, Evelyn replied. I'm being precise. If you wanted to. She slid the folder back across the counter. I won't sign this. Patricia's voice dropped, cold and certain. Then you should understand the consequences. Evelyn met her gaze. I do. And in that moment, she knew she had crossed a line they could never undo. Because the worst thing she had done wasn't refusing the agreement. It was showing them she was no longer afraid. The drive back to Manhattan was silent. Daniel kept his hands tight on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road, as if movement alone could undo what had happened. Evelyn sat beside him, watching the scenery blur past, the Hamptons fading behind them like a bad dream that refused to loosen its grip. Neither of them spoke. It wasn't the calm of understanding. It was the stillness after something breaks and no one knows how to pick up the pieces. When they reached the apartment, Daniel dropped his keys onto the counter with a sharp clatter. You didn't have to embarrass them, he said finally, his voice low but strained. Evelyn turned to him slowly. They tried to strip me of my rights. They were protecting me, he shot back. That's how my family operates. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. And what about protecting me? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Why are you making this a battle? She stared at him, searching his face for the man she had married. Because it already is one, she said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Daniel didn't answer. He retreated into the bedroom, closing the door behind him with a finality that echoed through the apartment. That night, Evelyn slept on the couch. Sometime past midnight, her phone vibrated softly. A message from an unknown number. You should have signed. This won't end well for you. Her heart thudded. She took a screenshot, then another message appeared almost immediately. Daniel deserves better than someone who doesn't know her place. Evelyn's hands were steady as she locked the phone and set it down. Fear tried to rise, but it was drowned out by something stronger. Certainty. By morning, Daniel had already left for work. No note, no apology, just absence. Evelyn sat at the dining table, laptop open, sunlight streaming through the windows, and began to do something she had avoided for years. She documented everything. Dates, conversations, names, the prenup, the postnuptial proposal, the messages, the way Patricia had spoken, the way Leonard had threatened, the way Daniel had looked at the floor instead of at her. Each word typed felt like reclaiming ground she hadn't realized she'd lost. Midway through the afternoon, her phone rang. This time, she recognized the number. Hannah Reed. I heard from a mutual contact that your in-laws made a move, Hannah said without preamble. Is that true? Evelyn hesitated, then answered honestly. Yes. There was a pause. You did the right thing by not signing. They won't stop, Evelyn said. I know, Hannah replied. That's why you need to be ready. After the call, Evelyn walked to the window and looked out over the city. Somewhere below, people hurried through their lives, unaware that hers had just tilted on its axis. That evening, Daniel came home late. He didn't mention the messages. He didn't ask how she was. Instead, he said, My parents are disappointed. Evelyn nodded. So am I. Something flickered across his face, irritation, fear, regret, she couldn't tell. But she knew now that whatever came next, she would face it alone. And strangely, that knowledge steadied her. Because when people show you who they are, believing them isn't weakness. It's preparation. The call came 3 days later, just as Evelyn was finishing a late lunch she hadn't tasted. Patricia Wright's name appeared on her phone, polished and inevitable. Evelyn stared at it for a moment, then answered. Evelyn, Patricia said warmly, as if nothing had happened. I was hoping we could talk. Evelyn said nothing. I've been thinking, Patricia continued. Families say things in moments of stress. Leonard and I may have been too direct. Too direct. Evelyn almost laughed. We don't want tension, Patricia went on. Daniel is under so much pressure. This situation is affecting his focus. There it was. Not concern for Evelyn, concern for Daniel's comfort. What do you want? Evelyn asked calmly. A fresh start, Patricia replied. There's a charity gala next week, the same ballroom at the plaza. We'd love for you to come. As family. Thanks for watching. Evelyn pictured the chandeliers, the smiles, the knives wrapped in silk. Why now? Because appearances matter, Patricia said without hesitation. And because misunderstandings grow when they're not addressed. After the call, Evelyn sat back in her chair, heart steady, mind alert. This wasn't reconciliation, it was damage control. Daniel came home early that evening, unusually attentive. He brought takeout from her favorite place, set the table carefully, poured wine. "They want to move past this," he said, not meeting her eyes. "For all of us." Evelyn watched him. "Do you?" He hesitated. "I want things to be easier." "Easier for whom?" He sighed. "Why does everything have to be a fight?" Evelyn leaned forward. "Why does everything require me to disappear?" Daniel fell silent. Later that night, Evelyn lay awake, the city humming beyond the windows. She replayed the words from the call. "As family." The phrase felt staged, rehearsed. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Chloe. "Dress code for the gala is black tie." "Don't worry, I can help you pick something appropriate." Evelyn closed her eyes. The next morning, another message arrived, this one from Madeline. "I hope you'll be there. It would be good for everyone to see unity." Unity. Evelyn recognized the tactic now. Sweetness first, pressure later. She forwarded the messages to Hannah Reed, then opened a new document on her laptop. If they wanted a performance, she would attend. But this time, she wouldn't be playing the role they assigned her. Over the next few days, Evelyn prepared quietly. She reviewed contracts she hadn't touched in years. She made calls she had delayed for too long. She listened more than she spoke. Each step brought something back to her. Not anger, not vengeance, but control. The night before the gala, Daniel stood in the doorway as she dressed, his expression conflicted. "You don't have to go," he said. Evelyn fastened her earrings, simple and unassuming. "Yes," she replied, "I do." He studied her, as if seeing her for the first time. "What are you planning?" She met his gaze. "I'm planning to stop pretending." At the plaza, the ballroom looked exactly as it had before. Elegant, imposing, familiar. Patricia greeted Evelyn with open arms and a smile too wide to be sincere. "I'm so glad you came," she said, loud enough for others to hear. Evelyn smiled back. "So am I." As the guests gathered and the music swelled, Evelyn felt the weight of every eye on her. She sensed expectation, curiosity, doubt. What they didn't sense was resolve. Because this time, Evelyn hadn't come to endure. She had come to finish what they started, and they had no idea what was coming. The second gala at the plaza felt different the moment Evelyn stepped inside. The room was the same crystal chandeliers, white linen, the soft murmur of wealth, but the air carried anticipation instead of dismissal. Heads turned. Conversations paused for half a second too long. People noticed her now, not because she looked richer, but because something about her presence refused to shrink. Evelyn moved slowly through the ballroom, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. She wore a black dress that was elegant without being loud, the kind of choice that didn't ask for approval. Daniel walked beside her, quieter than usual, his hand hovering near hers without touching. Patricia spotted them immediately. "There you are," she said brightly, stepping forward with open arms. "I was worried you might change your mind." "I considered it," Evelyn replied, her tone polite. "But I thought it would be rude not to come." Patricia laughed, relieved. "Exactly. Family shows up." As they spoke, Chloe drifted closer, camera-ready smile in place. "You look much better tonight," she said, scanning Evelyn quickly. "This is more appropriate." Evelyn smiled. "I'm glad it meets expectations." Chloe blinked, uncertain whether that was gratitude or something else. Across the room, Madeline stood near Leonard, deep in conversation with two donors. She glanced over, her eyes narrowing just slightly when she saw Evelyn. A flicker of calculation passed across her face before the smile returned. Leonard approached moments later, glass raised. "Evelyn," he said, nodding, "good to see you." "Thank you for inviting me," Evelyn replied. "Again." Leonard's smile tightened, but he gestured toward the center of the room. "We'll be making a short announcement later, a few words about unity and moving forward." Evelyn inclined her head. "I look forward to it." As the evening unfolded, the performance began. Patricia laughed loudly at Daniel's side, ensuring anyone watching saw harmony. Chloe guided Evelyn into photos, careful to position herself closer to the center. Madeline hovered just close enough to Daniel to be noticed, but not accused. Evelyn observed it all like a chessboard. Dinner was served, and once again, Place cards directed her seat, this time closer to the front. A gesture meant to signal reconciliation. Acceptance. It almost worked. Then Leonard stood. "Tough times remind us what matters," he began, voice carrying easily. "Family, trust, knowing that everyone at this table shares the same values." Applause followed. Leonard continued, "We've had misunderstandings recently, but tonight is about clarity." Evelyn felt Daniel stiffen beside her. Leonard turned slightly, addressing the room. "And sometimes clarity requires difficult conversations behind closed doors." A few heads turned toward Evelyn. Patricia reached for Evelyn's hand, squeezing lightly. "We're so glad you're here," she whispered. "It shows maturity." Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, then gently withdrew hers. When Leonard finished, the applause was louder this time. He lifted his glass. "To family." Glasses rose around the room. Evelyn did not lift hers. Instead, she stood. The sound of her chair sliding back cut cleanly through the noise. Conversations faltered. Daniel turned to her, eyes wide. Evelyn smiled softly. "If tonight is about clarity," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably present, "then I think it's only fair that everyone has it." The room went still. Every eye turned toward her. Patricia's smile froze. And in that silence, Evelyn took her first step toward the truth she had been holding back. The silence after Evelyn stood was not empty. It was charged. Leonard Wright remained frozen with his glass still raised, his confident posture cracking just enough for those who knew him well to notice. Patricia's hand tightened around her napkin. Chloe's smile slipped for the briefest second before she recovered. Madeline's eyes sharpened, her body going still, like a player sensing a sudden shift in the game. Daniel turned toward Evelyn, his voice low and urgent. "What are you doing?" Evelyn did not look at him. She faced the room. "I was invited here tonight," she began calmly, "because this family values clarity." A few polite chuckles followed, uncertain and nervous. "So, let's be clear," Evelyn continued. "Over the past several weeks, I have been pressured to sign legal documents without representation. I have been publicly diminished, privately threatened, and quietly replaced while still married." A murmur spread across the tables. Leonard set his glass down slowly. "Evelyn," he said with a tight smile, "this isn't the time or place." "You're right," Evelyn replied evenly. "This is the place. You chose it." Patricia stood abruptly. "You're emotional," she said, her voice sweet but strained. "No one forced you to do anything." Evelyn nodded. "Then you won't mind if I explain." She reached into her clutch and withdrew a slim folder. "Not dramatic. Not rushed. 3 weeks ago," Evelyn said, "I was presented with a postnuptial agreement designed to leave me with no legal protection if my marriage ended." Gasps rippled through the room. Leonard's jaw tightened. "That's a private family matter. It became public when it was used to intimidate me," Evelyn said, "and when I was told there would be consequences if I refused." Daniel stood halfway out of his chair. "Evelyn, stop." She finally looked at him. "You were there," she said quietly. "You heard it." The room leaned in. Evelyn turned back to the guests. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came because silence has been mistaken for consent." Chloe laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're twisting things." Evelyn met her gaze. "Then you won't mind if I share messages encouraging me to know my place." Chloe's color drained. Madeline stepped forward smoothly. "This is becoming inappropriate," she said. "Family disagreements shouldn't be weaponized." Evelyn studied her for a moment. "Interesting choice of words." Madeline's smile faltered. Leonard raised his voice. "Enough. You're undermining this family in front of people who don't need to hear it." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "No. I'm telling the truth in front of people you wanted to impress." That landed. A donor at the front table shifted uncomfortably. Another whispered something to his wife. Patricia's composure cracked. "You're being ungrateful," she snapped. "We welcomed you. You evaluated me," Evelyn corrected gently. "And when I didn't meet your expectations, you tried to erase me." Daniel finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this later." She shook her head. "Later is how this got this far." Evelyn closed the folder and held it against her chest. "I stayed quiet because I believed respect would come with time," she said. But respect doesn't grow where contempt is planted. The room was utterly still now. This is the first truth, Evelyn finished. And it won't be the last. She sat down slowly. No one applauded. No one laughed. And for the first time that night, the Wright family had lost control of the room. The room didn't recover after Evelyn sat down. It couldn't. People shifted in their seats, pretending to sip wine that had gone untouched. Whispers threaded through the tables like cracks spreading across glass. Leonard leaned toward Patricia, his mouth tight, his confidence bleeding out in small, controlled breaths. Evelyn felt Daniel's knee bouncing beside hers. He leaned in, his voice barely audible. "You've made your point. Please stop." She turned to him, her expression calm in a way that frightened him. "I'm just getting to it." Before Leonard could interrupt again, a voice rose from the left side of the room. "Evelyn Moore?" Heads turned. A woman in a tailored gray suit stood near the aisle, holding a slim leather portfolio. Her posture was composed, professional, unmistakably out of place among the gowns and tuxedos. "I'm Hannah Reed," the woman said clearly. "Family and Corporate Counsel." Patricia's face drained of color. Leonard straightened. "This is highly inappropriate," he snapped. "Security. I was invited," Hannah replied calmly, "by the event sponsor. It's foremost as is very bad." That word landed like a weight. "Sponsor." Murmurs grew louder. Hannah stepped forward, stopping a respectful distance from the Wright's table. "I won't take much time," she said. "But there are inaccuracies that need correction." Evelyn stood again, slower this time, steadier. "Please," she said, "go on." Hannah opened her portfolio and removed a single document. 2 weeks ago, my client requested a review of her original prenuptial agreement. Daniel's breath caught. Hannah continued, "What we discovered was not a standard amendment or clerical error. The document had been altered." The word echoed. "Altered how?" someone asked from the crowd. Hannah didn't look away from Leonard. Material clauses were modified without mutual consent, specifically sections concerning asset division and disclosure. Leonard laughed sharply. "That's absurd." Hannah nodded. "That was my first reaction too. Until we traced the digital history. Because everyone." She lifted her eyes, scanning the room. The revisions were made using credentials linked to a consulting firm. A pause. Madeline stiffened. Hannah turned slightly. Cross-advisory group. Every head snapped toward Madeline. "That's impossible," Madeline said quickly. "I've never touched their personal documents." Hannah met her gaze. "Your firm's IP address accessed the file, multiple times." The room erupted into gasps. Chloe whispered, "Madeline?" Leonard slammed his hand on the table. "This is a setup." Evelyn's voice cut through, steady and clear. "You brought her into my marriage," she said, looking at Leonard, then Patricia. "You let her advise, influence, and position herself." Madeline's composure cracked. "I was helping," she insisted. "You all asked me to." Patricia stood abruptly. "That's not what this is about." "It is," Evelyn replied, "because this wasn't just cruelty, it was planning." Ender. Daniel looked between them, horror dawning. "You changed the prenup?" he asked his parents. No one answered. The silence was enough. Hannah closed the folder. "These findings have been documented. Any further attempts to enforce or conceal these changes would constitute fraud." Leonard's power, the thing he had wielded so effortlessly, collapsed in real time. Evelyn felt it then, not triumph. Release. She turned to the room, one last time. "This is the second truth," she said. "And now you know why silence was never an option." She sat down, and for the first time that night, no one dared challenge her. Because this time, the truth had receipts. The gala never officially ended, but something irreversible had. Guests no longer pretended to enjoy themselves. Conversations broke apart mid-sentence. People glanced at their phones, then at one another, recalculating distances, alliances, reputations. The Wright family's table, once the center of gravity, had become an island no one wanted to land on. Evelyn remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap, as if she hadn't just cracked open a carefully maintained illusion. Daniel sat beside her, rigid. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. He stared straight ahead, unable or unwilling to look at his parents. Leonard finally stood again, this time without ceremony. "This event is over," he said sharply. We're done here. No one applauded. No one objected. Patricia leaned toward Evelyn, her voice low and trembling with controlled fury. You've humiliated us. Evelyn turned her head slowly. You humiliated yourselves, she replied. I only stopped protecting you from it. Patricia recoiled as if struck. Madeline had gone completely still. The confident strategist was gone, replaced by someone calculating exits. She whispered something to Chloe, but Chloe pulled away, suddenly unwilling to be associated. Hannah Reed quietly stepped back. Her job done for now. She gave Evelyn a brief nod, professional, respectful, final. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. We should go. Evelyn stood without argument. As they moved through the room, people stepped aside instinctively. Some watched with open curiosity, others with discomfort, a few with something close to admiration. Outside, the night air hit Evelyn like a wave. Daniel stopped near the steps of the plaza, running a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, frustration spilling over. About the prenup. About all of this. Evelyn faced him fully. I trusted you to see what was happening without needing proof. That's not fair, he snapped. She nodded once. Neither was this. Daniel looked away, his voice dropping. My parents are ruined. Evelyn's expression didn't change. No, they're exposed. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unfamiliar. A black car pulled up to the curb. The driver waited. Evelyn hesitated, then spoke quietly. I'm not going home with you tonight. Daniel looked at her sharply. What? I need space, she said. And clarity, things you've asked me for repeatedly, but only when they benefited you. She opened the car door. Daniel reached for her arm, then stopped himself. So that's it? Evelyn paused. No, she said honestly. This is the beginning. The car pulled away, leaving Daniel standing alone on the steps. Later that night, Evelyn sat in a quiet apartment she hadn't used in years. The lights were low. The city hummed outside, distant and steady. She sank onto the couch, the adrenaline finally draining from her body. And then, for the first time since the gala began weeks ago, she cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just tears slipping silently down her face as the weight of everything she had carried alone finally pressed in. She cried for the marriage she had believed in, for the version of herself who thought patience could earn respect, for the nights she had stayed quiet to keep peace. But when the tears stopped, something else remained. Relief. Because the truth was out now. Fully, publicly, and whatever came next, divorce, reconciliation, war, would happen in the open. No more shrinking. No more silence. Evelyn wiped her face, stood, and walked to the window. The city lights stretched endlessly before her. And for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. The apartment was too quiet. Evelyn stood in the center of the living room, heels still on, coat still draped over her arm, as if she might leave again at any moment. The silence pressed against her ears harder than the noise of the gala ever had. She set her coat down slowly and walked toward the window. Below, Manhattan pulsed with life, cars moving, lights flickering, people going somewhere with purpose. The world had not stopped just because hers had cracked open. Her phone lay face down on the table. She hadn't checked it since leaving the plaza. She didn't need to. She could already imagine the messages waiting for her. Daniel, Patricia, Leonard. Damage control disguised as concern. Evelyn sank onto the couch and finally allowed her shoulders to sag. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night drained all at once, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Her hands began to tremble, just slightly, as if her body had been holding itself together on sheer will alone. She pressed her palms together, breathing slowly, counting the seconds the way she used to when she was younger and afraid of crying in front of people who didn't deserve her tears. But here, alone, there was no audience to protect herself from. The first tear fell without warning. Then another. Soon, she was crying in a way she hadn't allowed herself to cry in years, quietly, deeply, her chest tightening as grief finally found its voice. She covered her mouth with one hand, not to stop the sound, but to contain it, as if even now she feared being too much. She cried for the humiliation she had endured with grace. For the nights she had replayed conversations, wondering how she could have been kinder, smaller, easier to love. For the version of herself who believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. And most of all, she cried for Daniel. Not the man standing on the steps of the plaza, stunned and exposed, but the man she had loved, the one she thought would choose her when it mattered. Her phone vibrated. She didn't look at it. Another vibration followed. Then another. Finally, she turned the phone over. A text from Daniel. I never wanted this. You didn't have to do it like that. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. Another message came almost immediately. My parents are furious. They're saying, you planned this. She stared at the screen, her tears slowing, something colder replacing them. Planned this. As if dignity were a trap. As if truth were a weapon she'd unfairly drawn. She typed back slowly, deliberately. I didn't plan to be mistreated. I planned to survive it. She set the phone down again, her hands steadier now. The crying stopped. In its place came something heavier, but clearer. Acceptance. Not of what had been done to her, but of what could never be undone. Evelyn stood and walked to the bathroom, washing her face, studying her reflection. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged, but beneath the exhaustion she saw something new. Strength that didn't ask permission. She changed into comfortable clothes, made herself a cup of tea she barely drank, and sat back down, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, indifferent but alive. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't healed. But she was awake. And that mattered more than anything. Because the woman who cried on that couch was not weak. She was shedding the last pieces of a life that required her silence. Tomorrow, there would be consequences, conversations, fallout. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of truth, Evelyn allowed herself one final realization. Breaking didn't mean she was finished. It meant she was finally free to rebuild on her own terms. Morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, pale and unforgiving. Evelyn woke on the couch where she had fallen asleep, her body stiff, her head heavy. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the memories returned all at once, the gala, the documents, the silence, the car pulling away from the plaza. She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples. Her phone lay on the table where she had left it, 23 missed messages. Daniel. Unknown numbers. A voicemail from Patricia she didn't bother to open. What caught her attention was a single email, time-stamped just before midnight, from Lucas Bennett. She frowned. The name stirred something distant, familiar. She opened it. Evelyn, I didn't plan to reach out like this, but after last night, it felt wrong to stay silent. If you remember me, we met years ago, Columbia, the winter seminar. You helped me when no one else would. I was at the gala. I saw everything. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. No pressure, just honesty. Lucas. Evelyn leaned back, exhaling slowly. Lucas Bennett. The memory sharpened. A quiet, intense student who had almost dropped out after his startup collapsed. Her father had quietly invested then, against all advice. Lucas had disappeared from her life shortly after, swallowed by the business world. She checked her phone again. A new text appeared. I'm in the city today. Coffee at Central Park, near the south entrance, noon. If not, I'll understand. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment. At noon, she found herself sitting on a bench near the park, coffee warming her hands. The city moved around her, indifferent and alive, exactly as it had the night before. Lucas approached on foot, no entourage, no performance. He looked older, sharper, but his eyes were the same, direct, thoughtful. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for writing, Evelyn replied. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand filling. I owe you more than you know, Lucas said finally. Your family saved my company. But more than that, you treated me like I wasn't disposable. Evelyn smiled faintly. I know what that feels like. Lucas nodded. Last night, what they did to you wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. Her gaze lifted. What do you mean? Lucas hesitated, then spoke carefully. Madeline Cross wasn't there by accident. She's been circling investment families for years. She tried the same approach with my board once. Evelyn's chest tightened. She altered my prenup. If you doesn't stas, dot of another. I know, Lucas said quietly. Her firm has been flagged before. Quietly buried. Powerful families don't like noise. Evelyn absorbed that in silence. There's more, Lucas continued. Leonard Wright has been leveraging family connections to mask risky moves that won't hold up if someone looks closely. Evelyn's grip tightened on her cup. Lucas met her eyes. You standing up last night shifted the balance. People are watching now. End quote. For the first time since the gala, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Support. Not pity. Not obligation. Respect. I'm not asking you to fight, Lucas said, but if you choose to, you won't be alone. Evelyn looked out at the park, at people walking dogs, pushing strollers, living lives that didn't revolve around power games and polite cruelty. She thought of the woman she had been quiet, accommodating, endlessly patient, and the woman she was becoming. I don't want revenge, she said slowly. I want the truth to matter. Lucas smiled. That's usually the most dangerous choice. Evelyn nodded. Good. As they stood to leave, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel she didn't read. For the first time, she didn't feel pulled by it. Because something had changed. The night she broke had not left her empty. It had made space. And now, unexpectedly, that space was beginning to fill with clarity, with allies, and with a future that no longer required her to disappear. Evelyn didn't rush her next move. That alone unsettled people. For a full week after the gala, she stayed quiet. No statements, no interviews, no dramatic gestures. The silence worked like pressure underwater, bending things that had once felt immovable. Leonard Wright noticed first. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. A longtime partner suddenly asked for updated documentation. Another requested an external audit, something Leonard had avoided for years under the excuse of legacy trust. Daniel noticed too, though he didn't fully understand it. You're freezing everyone out, he said during a tense phone call. My father says you're trying to punish him. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, sunlight pouring into the office she had reclaimed downtown. Her MacBook sat open in front of her, documents neatly arranged, timelines aligned. I'm not punishing anyone, she replied calmly. I'm stepping out of the way. That's worse, Daniel snapped. You're letting things fall. No, Evelyn corrected. I'm letting them stand on their own. That afternoon, Lucas Bennett joined her in the conference room, glass walls overlooking the city. He placed a slim tablet on the table between them. This is what Madeline didn't want you to see, he said. Evelyn scanned the screen. Emails, internal memos, a pattern of introductions, quiet edits, strategic assistance, offered to families with influence and something to hide. She targeted the Wrights because Leonard was vulnerable, Lucas continued, and because you were in the way. Evelyn felt the weight of it settle, not as pain, but as confirmation. So she wasn't just trying to replace me, Evelyn said. Lucas shook his head. She was trying to bypass you. Wive 1. That night, Evelyn authorized a single action. A routine review. Nothing aggressive, nothing public. Just compliance, triggered quietly, through the channels that mattered. The results came faster than expected. By Friday, Madeline Cross was asked to step away from client-facing work, pending investigation. Her firm issued a vague statement. Leonard's name surfaced in places it shouldn't have. The same evening, Evelyn attended a small, invitation-only event at a Park Avenue boardroom. No chandeliers, no orchestra, just polished wood, muted light, and people who understood leverage. She walked in alone. Conversations paused. Someone pulled out a chair. No one questioned why she was there. Evelyn spoke briefly, clearly, without emotion. She didn't accuse. She didn't demand. She outlined facts, timelines, risks. When she finished, a man at the far end of the table nodded once. That aligns with what we're seeing. End quote. Another added, we'll need distance from the Wrights until this is resolved. The decision was made without drama. That was the real power. Later, as she left the building, her phone rang. Daniel again. They're cutting ties, he said, panic bleeding through his voice. You didn't have to do this. Evelyn stopped on the sidewalk, traffic flowing around her. I didn't do anything, she said. I just stopped protecting what wasn't mine to protect. There was a pause. Is there any way to fix this? Daniel asked quietly. Evelyn thought of the woman who had stood at the edge of rooms, waiting to be chosen. Then she thought of the woman who had just watched a board turn without raising her voice. I don't know, she said honestly, but it won't be by going backward. She ended the call and looked up at the city skyline. sharp against the evening sky. The pieces were moving now, not because she pushed them, but because she finally stepped into the space she had always been standing beside. And for the first time since this began, Evelyn wasn't reacting. She was directing. The meeting was scheduled for 9 sharp. No press, no guests, no champagne. Just a long table, muted lighting, and people who didn't raise their voices because they didn't need to. Evelyn arrived 5 minutes early. She took her seat without hesitation, placing a slim folder in front of her. Around the table sat board members, senior advisors, and 2 external auditors, faces neutral, eyes alert. This wasn't a trial, it was an evaluation, and for the first time, Evelyn was not the subject. She was the source. Leonard Wright entered last. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically, his suit was still impeccable, but in the way his confidence now carried a crack he couldn't quite conceal. He avoided Evelyn's eyes as he took his seat. The chair at the head of the table remained empty. That, too, was intentional. "Let's begin," one of the auditors said, voice calm, procedural. "This review concerns governance risks and unauthorized influence." Leonard opened his mouth. "Before we'll ask questions," the auditor interrupted gently. "You'll answer." The shift was immediate. Evelyn watched Leonard's hands curl slightly on the table. Documents were distributed. Timelines projected. The pattern emerged not as an accusation, but as a sequence of facts that spoke for themselves. Consulting overlaps, edited agreements, introductions made without disclosure, pressure applied under the guise of family consensus. No raised voices. No theatrics. Just clarity. Madeline Cross's name appeared on the screen. Leonard stiffened. She acted independently. A pause. One of the board members turned toward Evelyn. "Miss Moore, would you like to clarify your involvement?" Evelyn met his gaze. "I had none," she said evenly. "That was the problem." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Another board member nodded slowly. "So the interference occurred without the consent or awareness of a principal stakeholder?" "Yes," Evelyn replied. Leonard leaned forward, frustration creeping into his tone. "This is being blown out of proportion." A woman across the table folded her hands. "What's being addressed is control," she said. "And whether it was abused?" The word hung there. Control. Evelyn felt it then, not triumph, not vindication, but something quieter. Release? When the meeting concluded, no vote was announced. None was needed. Recommendations would follow. Partnerships would be reevaluated. Distance would be established. Leonard stood abruptly. "You think this ends well for you?" He snapped at Evelyn under his breath. She looked at him calmly. "I think it ends honestly." He scoffed and walked out. Evelyn remained seated for a moment, gathering her things. A few board members approached her, not with sympathy, but with respect. "Thank you for your transparency," one said. "It was overdue," Evelyn replied. Outside, the city greeted her with its usual indifference. Traffic moved, phones rang, people hurried past without knowing a line had just been crossed inside a quiet room. Her phone buzzed. "Daniel?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked a few blocks, breathing deeply, feeling the ground beneath her feet. For years, she had believed power meant being included. She knew better now. Power was being heard without asking. As she stopped at a corner, waiting for the light to change, Evelyn understood the final truth of it all. She hadn't exposed them to hurt them. She had exposed them to stop disappearing. And in doing so, she had reclaimed something no one at that table could ever take from her again. Her place. Not as a wife. Not as a daughter-in-law. But as herself. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It unfolded in layers, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. By Monday morning, Leonard Wright's name had vanished from 2 advisory boards he'd sat on for over a decade. The emails were polite, almost apologetic. A matter of optics, temporary distance, best for all parties. Leonard read them in his study, one after another, the words blurring into a single message he'd never had to face before. "You are no longer untouchable." Patricia felt it differently. Her social calendar began to thin. Luncheons postponed, invitations unanswered. A longtime friend declined dinner with a vague excuse about travel. At first, Patricia told herself it was coincidence. By the 3rd cancellation, she knew better. At a charity committee meeting, a woman she'd mentored for years leaned in and whispered, "People are being careful right now. Careful. Patricia smiled tightly and nodded, but the word echoed like a verdict. Chloe's reckoning was louder. Within 48 hours, 2 brand partners quietly paused their contracts. One requested a values alignment review. Another asked for clarification regarding her involvement in a recent family controversy. Her follower count dipped. Comments shifted. Admiration curdled into suspicion. She refreshed her phone obsessively, waiting for support that didn't come. Madeline Cross's collapse was swift and merciless. Her firm released a short statement placing her on indefinite leave pending internal review. Clients distanced themselves. Calls went unanswered. The careful persona she'd built, brilliant, indispensable, above reproach, fractured under scrutiny. In her apartment, Madeline stared at her laptop, the same screen that once gave her access to other people's lives, now reflecting only her own isolation. Daniel watched it all unravel from the inside. His father stopped calling. His mother started crying. At work, his name became associated with tension rather than opportunity. A promotion discussion quietly disappeared from the calendar. A senior partner pulled him aside and said, "You might want to take some time. Things are complicated." Daniel sat alone in his office long after everyone else had left, staring at the city lights he once believed defined success. He finally understood what Evelyn had meant. Silence had protected him, and now it offered nothing. Evelyn learned about most of it secondhand. She didn't celebrate, she didn't gloat. She continued her days as usual: meetings, emails, decisions that now landed squarely in her hands without resistance. When Lucas updated her, she listened calmly. "Madeline's finished," he said. "Leonard's being reviewed. People are stepping back fast." Evelyn nodded. That was always going to happen. Lucas studied her. "You're not enjoying this." "No," Evelyn replied. "I'm relieved." One evening, she ran into Patricia unexpectedly at a small gallery opening. Patricia looked thinner somehow, her confidence brittle. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Evelyn inclined her head politely and walked past. That was the moment Patricia understood. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence. Daniel called that night. "I didn't protect you," he said quietly. "I see that now." Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment. "Seeing it doesn't undo it." "I know," he said, "but I needed you to know I understand." She believed him. And still, it wasn't enough. Because the hardest truth wasn't that they'd fallen, it was that they had built their power on her silence. And now that silence was gone. What remained was balance. Not punishment, not mercy. Just the simple, devastating weight of cause and effect. And for the first time since all of this began, Evelyn felt something close to peace. Daniel waited for her in the small cafe on the corner of Madison Avenue, the kind of place they used to love before everything became complicated. The tables were close together. The light, soft, forgiving. He chose it deliberately, hoping familiarity might do what words could not. Evelyn arrived on time. She noticed immediately how different he looked. Not unkempt, not broken, just smaller. As if the certainty that once wrapped around him like armor had finally slipped away. He stood when he saw her. "Thank you for coming." She nodded and sat, placing her phone face down on the table. "You said it was important." Daniel swallowed. His hands rested flat on the table, empty. No watch, no props. That, at least, was honest. "I lost my position," he said quietly. "Not officially yet, but it's coming. My father can't stop it. He doesn't even return my calls anymore." Evelyn listened, without interruption. "I know none of that is your responsibility," he continued. "I'm not telling you to make you feel anything. I finally understand what you were standing against." She met his eyes. "Understanding is not the same as choosing." He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I chose wrong." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe filling the space between them. "I thought if I stayed quiet, things would work out," Daniel said. "I thought keeping the peace meant being loyal." Evelyn's voice was calm. "Keeping the peace at someone else's expense is not loyalty." Daniel looked down. "I let them treat you like an obstacle, like something temporary." "Yes," she said simply. He took a breath. "I'm asking you for something I may not deserve." End quote, end quote. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. "I'm asking you to give us another chance," Daniel said. "Not as we were. as something new. Therapy. Boundaries. Distance from my family. All of it. I'll sign whatever agreement you want. I'll do the work. The words were practiced, but the fear behind them was real. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. She thought of the woman she had been patient, hopeful, endlessly forgiving. She thought of the woman she was now, steadier, clearer, unwilling to disappear for love. I believe you mean this, she said finally. Hope flashed across his face. But that doesn't mean I can accept it, she continued. The hope faded, replaced by understanding that hurt more than anger. You're not a bad person, Daniel, Evelyn said, but you are a man who only found his voice when the room turned against you. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. It's a story. I needed you when it cost nothing, she went on. You're offering yourself now that it costs everything. Daniel nodded once, a tear slipping free despite his effort to contain it. Is there anything I can do? Evelyn reached for her coffee, took a slow sip. Yes, she said. Learn from this. Become the kind of man who doesn't need loss to tell him what matters. She stood, gathering her coat. Daniel looked up at her, his voice barely audible. Do you ever think you might forgive me? Evelyn paused. I already have, she said gently. That doesn't mean I'm coming back. She walked out of the cafe without looking back. The bell above the door chiming softly behind her. Daniel remained seated, alone, finally facing the full weight of what he had lost. Outside, Evelyn stepped into the afternoon light, her pace unhurried. This wasn't a victory. It was closure. And for the first time, that was more than enough. Spring arrived quietly, without ceremony. Evelyn noticed it one morning as she walked through Central Park, the trees just beginning to green, the air softer than it had been in months. The city felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Her divorce was finalized without drama. The altered documents were voided. The original prenup, untouched and fair, stood. Evelyn walked away with what was legally and rightfully hers, but more importantly, without having to negotiate her dignity. There were no public statements, no interviews, just signatures, finality, and a door closing gently instead of slamming. She moved into a new apartment overlooking the river, smaller than the one she'd shared with Daniel, but filled with light. It was hers in a way nothing had been before. Every object inside had been chosen deliberately. Nothing existed to impress anyone. Work changed too. Evelyn launched the scholarship she had quietly planned for years, naming it after her mother. It supported women navigating coercive marriages, legal intimidation, and financial control. Not with charity, but with tools. Lawyers, education, time. The first acceptance letter made her cry harder than the gala ever had. Lucas remained a constant presence, not rushing, not hovering. They talked often, sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing at all. He never asked her to be anything other than what she was in that moment. One evening, months later, they sat on her balcony watching the city lights come on one by one. You don't flinch anymore, Lucas said thoughtfully. Evelyn smiled. I don't need to. He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. When he asked her to marry him, it wasn't grand, no crowd, no spectacle. Just a quiet question spoken with certainty, not fear. She said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small, private, a handful of people who had earned a place in her life. No power plays, no performances. Just warmth, laughter, and a promise built on choice rather than expectation. Somewhere across the city, the Wright family continued to live with the consequences of what they had set in motion. Leonard faded into irrelevance, his name now spoken cautiously, if at all. Patricia learned the difference between influence and respect, though it came too late to save her social standing. Chloe rebuilt slowly, quietly, without the shortcuts she once relied on. Daniel moved away. He sent one final message, months later. I'm trying to be better. I hope you're happy. Evelyn read it once, then archived it. She was happy, not because she had won, but because she had stopped losing herself. On the anniversary of the gala, Evelyn returned to the plaza, not for a party, but for a fundraiser hosted by her foundation. She stood beneath the same chandeliers that once watched her shrink and spoke briefly, confidently, without resentment. This space taught me something, she said. Power isn't taken, it's returned when you stop giving it away. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was sincere. As the night ended and she stepped outside, Lucas took her hand. She looked back once at the building, then turned away. That chapter was closed. Evelyn Moore hadn't been rewarded with riches. She had always had those. She was rewarded with love that didn't demand her silence, with a life that didn't require her to endure, with peace earned, not granted. And that was the ending no one could ever take from her.